here. For some reason, Zoom decided to crash on us.
Yep.
So audio, you probably won't hear any of this. I'm just going to splice it all together. But if you're watching the video, we're going to resume. Where I just left off was I was discussing Shane's point of view in regards to Sophia. And I discussed that Shane, ultimately, end of the day, he's being very pragmatic. He's looking to he at this point, he just feels like the juice isn't worth the squeeze. It's not worth risking the lives of the others for a child who ran off and really has no way of defending herself. So JJ, give me your thoughts on this. As far as, you know, I kind of see that Shane has a point. What's your thoughts in regards to Rick's viewpoint?
Well, with Rick, it's not confirmed whether or not Sophia is at this point dead or alive. She might be sheltered or huddled somewhere, kind of waiting for them to come rescue her. It's pretty much that stranded island dilemma of, do I try to get off the island or do I stay on the island? Most of the times you're better off staying put, while survival experts will argue that you're better off just staying put and waiting for somebody to come get you. So as far as what Rick may know, that's what she's doing, is she's probably huddled in a hole somewhere waiting to be rescued. But then again, it is taking days, literal days, to go and find her.
Correct. So to me, I mean, and this is the way I look at it, Rick he's almost trying, like, I understand what he's doing. He's trying to do the sympathetic thing. What if she's holed up somewhere and she's waiting for us? And
a lot of that, I think, is like his old, the old cop, because they are cops. That might be that old cop mentality of, like, we keep looking until we at least find a body. We have to confirm, this missing person. So, and that's pretty much what she's at this point. So a side story of the whole Herschel Farm, events of season 2 is that Herschel's holding walkers in the barn. The group eventually discovers this. And now there's this whole argument of, now what do we do with these walkers in the barn? Like, and Herschel basically saying, if you do anything to those walkers in the barn, get the hell out of my farm. You're not staying here anymore. And Carl is still kind of recovering from his wounds. So Rick kind of just goes along with Herschel. All right, he has his, as long as it's locked up, we'll leave it alone. While Shane, on the other hand, is, no, screw that. Let's kill them all. They're all a danger. And it basically comes to a point where Rick and Herschel are basically have them, like, what do they call those poles with the wires on the ends that they basically get like rabid animals with?
Oh, yeah.
They basically have that on the walkers, and they're trying to lead them to the farm. And Shane just erupts like, look, you call this a person? And he literally says, do you see what you are holding? Which Herschel then responds, I see who I'm holding. So they, Herschel sees a sick person where Shane sees, an enemy.
Yes, a rabid animal.
Yes, exactly. And so basically he starts shooting at the zombie that, or the walker. I keep saying, the show makes a big deal not to say zombie, but he shoots the walker in the bullets, and it's like, can a human being take that? That's right through the heart. That's right through the lung. Can they take that? And Rick's, yelling, that's enough. And Shane's like, yeah, that is enough. Shoots, the walker right in the head, and then starts walking to the barn with his rant about, enough, risking our lives for a little girl who's probably gone. I'm very sorry. Enough, living next to a bunch of, dead in a barn that could kill us at any time. Like, they killed this person. They killed Otis, which, by the way, Shane, you killed Otis when you guys went to go get the medical supplies. But that's besides the point, because he unlocks the barn, lets them all out, and the whole group just starts shooting down. So basically, Shane at this point is trying to assert his dominance as the leader and making the decisions that he believes Rick cannot make.
And it's interesting because with where Shane is at, this isn't a cut and dry situation. I mean, you have Shane, who took this mantle of leadership when Rick was basically left for dead. I mean, Shane didn't let the walkers just get to Rick. He took, like we said earlier, he took the time to barricade the room so that his friend would have at least not die a terrible death being torn apart by these walkers.
Yep. While in a coma.
Exactly. And he adopted a family that wasn't his own. And
he took in all these strangers that he doesn't know.
Correct. And so he did all this with the understanding of, okay, it's kind of at what point do you close the door? Right. You let these new people in, you've started to trust. And again, this episode is about trust. You started to trust these strangers to build a survival group, if you will, to make it through an unexplainably terrible, unexpected event.
Right.
So his friend comes back and you'd think, oh, yay, my friend's back. But oh, shit, well, we're going to figure this dynamic out. But then Shane, and to me, he's a sympathetic character. He gets cold shouldered by Lori.
Mm-hmm. Who he is, he becomes madly in love.
Correct. Because, and he did nothing wrong. He didn't go after his wife when she was alive. They kind of fell in love due to circumstance. And then in his viewpoint, I kind of can understand, like, yes, it's easy to say when everyone was alive as a police officer, okay, obviously we don't stop giving up looking for someone. We try, but you're essentially now looking for someone in a war zone.
Yeah, you're not in the old world. This is a new world. There's new rules.
New world and new rules. And I think at this point, Shane is still trying to cling to a world that doesn't exist anymore. I think he's trying to cling to notions and ideals and morals that maybe have a place in organized society, but you're not in organized society anymore.
Or Rick, right?
Sorry, yes, Rick. Yeah, Rick is trying to follow the rules to a game that has changed.
And you can kind of see that because as Shane is unlocking the barn and, getting ready to blow, all these people that Herschel has gathered. It's funny, I just called them people instead of walkers that have gathered. But Rick is holding on to this one and pleading with Shane. And he literally says, don't do this, brother.
Yep.
He calls him brother, don't do this, brother. Shane, stop this. Herschel, hold on to the, and like all the panic ensues. And of course, at the end of that scene, who appears out from the barn?
But zombified Sophia.
Yep. She comes out of the barn and it's just, and right there in front of Carol too. She's like, there, it's confirmed. There you go, Rick. It's officially confirmed. You got your answer.
Yep.
And again, it kind of comes down to that idea of Shane feels that Rick is too hesitant, whereas Rick wants to think things through and try to figure out the right decision. And they're both not wrong.
No, if anything, the two of them combined would make a good leader. Individually, there's large gaps in their style, and this really kind of begins to drive a wedge between who Rick was kind of viewing as his strongest ally, and this begins Rick's descent into, one could call it paranoia, one could call it extreme skepticism, but it starts to begin to drive the wedge, and it begins to take, I guess you could say, naive Rick, and starts giving him a cold, hard look at the world that he now lives in.
Yeah.
And again, since today's topic is about trust, we look at, imagine, if you will, the person you trust the most, your best friend, your brother or your sister, the person that you view as your confidant. And you're put in these situations where things aren't right or wrong. It's not like Shane was like, oh, I want to kill a bunch of innocent people. And Rick's like, no.
Yeah, no.
Shane's like, we both want the same thing. We want our family and our friends, our tribe, if you will.
They're both trying
to survive.
Rick, you may say Rick is trying to come from a place of more understanding, whereas Shane is trying to come from a place of more decisive, decisions that's going to, positively affect the group as a whole. I guess it's like a little bit of that old philosopher idea of you would know this better than I would, but it's almost like a little bit of like the trolley.
The old trolley.
Actually, say, yeah. Do you kill 5 people or 1 person? And,
correct.
And like again, it's that thought experiment of there's no right or wrong answer. It's just what feels right.
Correct. And to build upon that for our listeners who are not familiar, I learned this in college. By the example of Bob and the Bugatti.
Bob and the Bugatti.
So let me explain. Yes. So it's the same train car thought experiment. And it's the thought process is this, is you have Bob. Okay. Bob has worked his whole life. And his retirement plan is a Bugatti, which is a car. It's a very expensive car. And he he had this car. He bought it when it was relatively cheap, and he's take care of it. And he's, his whole life he has been being careful about this car. This car represents Bob's life.
Okay.
So at one point, Bob's Bugatti is parked on a train track, and Bob is next to a lever that has the ability to switch 2 tracks. So on one track, you have Bob and his Bugatti. Here you have Bob's Bugatti. On another track, you have, and there's all kinds of stuff you can put there. You could put a school bus, you can put all kinds of stuff. So it comes to a point where Bob has to make a decision. Either the train hits his Bugatti and his life is ruined, or it hits whatever the other thing is. And the common example of it is, instead of the Bugatti and a person, is you do on one track is a single person tied down. On another track is 4 people tied down, and you control the lever. The train will kill one group. Do you let them kill 1, or do you let them kill 4? And you can even make it even more challenging by saying this one person is like your Mother Teresa. She's just a really good-hearted person. And the other track is for people you don't know.
Right.
Poor. I mean, you could.
They could be kind souls, or they could be the most evilest.
Exactly. But there's
world.
4 lives on this track and 1 life on that track, and you don't have a choice. The train is going to kill one group. So the thought experiment is, which one do you do, and why do you do it? So to use that metaphor, we have Shane and Rick standing, and they're both standing at the lever that switches the tracks. And on one track, there is the people that they know. So there's their group of people. On the other track is Sophia, who was someone they know,
but no longer is.
But is not there. She's separated. So they have a choice. Either they can let the train hit Sophia and save the group, or risk killing the group to potentially save Sophia. That's the choice they're left. And what makes the choice all the more difficult is it's no longer one person at the lever. It's 2 people and 1 lever. And they're trying to determine what is the right course. And again, neither is necessarily wrong. To go further into it, I think this is the difference between pragmatism and idealism.
Okay.
So by saying pragmatism, what I mean is people who look at the world as it simply is. All you can do is gauge the world based on your own empirical evidence, what you yourself are experiencing. So the pragmatist looks and judges everything based on how they're experiencing it. And they look at it as the world is what it is. And that is what Shane is doing. He understands it's not right. He understands it's not fair, but it is the way it is. Sophia ran off. It sucks. She didn't mean to run off. She got scared. They did try to look for her initially.
And then Carl had to get shot.
Exactly. And then other shit happened. So at that point, that sucks that Sophia died, or that, because it's what he assumes. Yeah. That sucks that she's not here and we can't get to her, but we can't risk killing everyone to potentially save her.
Right. And again, like you're saying, the idealist, Rick, he wants to hang on to what he believes is morally right, morally wrong.
Correct. And his thought is, well, if we're careful, maybe we won't miss people. Maybe we won't lose people.
Right.
And we can save everybody. He's getting hung up on the details, such as, well, Sophia's a child. She's an innocent. She can't defend herself.
She might just be held up somewhere.
Exactly. And all of his thoughts of, well, maybe she's hiding out. Well, okay, that's a big world out there. Yeah. It's a big, and so you're meant to see that it's a tough decision, but it's the first of several that erodes the friendship. Yep. What happens next?
So, to jump forward, Herschel is so distraught about what happened, he kind of runs off to a bar. Herschel is somebody who is like a recovering alcoholic. As soon as shit really went down and that whole thing, he just kind of went to a bar and got sauced. Like deeply sauced, like properly sauced. The real,
like a good set of ribs. Was well sauced,
very sauced. Super dizzy. Don't know where you're at. Rick goes off to finds him at the local drinking hole, and basically they run into another group of survivors that essentially.
Okay, so for those watching the video episode here, for some reason, Zoom decided to crash on us. Yep. So audio, you probably won't hear any of this. I'm just going to splice it all together. But if you're watching the video, we're going to resume. Where I just left off was I was discussing Shane's point of view in regards to Sophia. And I discussed that Shane, ultimately, end of the day, he's being very pragmatic. He's looking to he at this point, he just feels like the juice isn't worth the squeeze. It's not worth risking the lives of the others for a child who ran off and really has no way of defending herself. So JJ, give me your thoughts on this. As far as, I kind of see that Shane has a point. What's your thoughts in regards to Rick's viewpoint?
Well, with Rick, it's not confirmed whether or not Sophia is at this point dead or alive. She might be sheltered or huddled somewhere, kind of waiting for them to come rescue her. It's pretty much that stranded island dilemma of, do I try to get off the island or do I stay on the island? Most of the times you're better off staying put. A lot of survival experts will argue that you're better off just staying put and waiting for somebody to come get you. So as far as what Rick may know, that's what she's doing, is she's probably huddled in a hole somewhere waiting to be rescued. But then again, it is taking days, literal days, to go and find her.
Correct. So to me, I mean, and this is the way I look at it, he's almost trying, like, I understand what he's doing. He's trying to do the sympathetic thing. What if she's holed up somewhere and she's waiting for us?
And a lot of that, I think, is like his old, the old cop, because they are cops. That might be that old cop mentality of like, we keep looking until we at least find a body. We have to confirm, this missing person. So, and that's pretty much what she's at this point. So a side story of the whole Herschel Farm, events of season 2 is that Herschel's holding walkers in the barn. The group eventually discovers this. And now there's this whole argument of, now what do we do with these walkers in the barn? Like, and Herschel basically saying, if you do anything to those walkers in the barn, get the hell out of my farm. You're not staying here anymore. And Carl is still kind of recovering from his wounds. So Rick kind of just goes along with Herschel. All right, he has his, as long as it's locked up, we'll leave it alone. While Shane, on the other hand, is, no, screw that. Let's kill them all. They're all a danger. And it basically comes to a point where Rick and Herschel are basically have them like, what do they call those poles with the wires on the ends that they basically get like rabid animals with?
Oh, yeah.
They basically have that on the walkers, and they're trying to lead them to the farm. And Shane just erupts like, look, you call this a person? And he literally says, do you see what you are holding? Which Herschel then responds, I see who I'm holding. So Herschel sees a sick person where Shane sees, an enemy.
Yes, a rabid animal.
Yes, exactly. And so basically he starts shooting at the zombie that, or the walker. I keep saying, the show makes a big deal not to say zombie, but he shoots the walker in the bullets, and it's like, can a human being take that? That's right through the heart. That's right through the lung. Can they take that? And Rick's, yelling, that's enough. And Shane's like, yeah, that is enough. Shoots, the walker right in the head, and then starts walking to the barn with his rant about, enough, risking our lives for a little girl who's probably gone. I'm very sorry. Enough, living next to a bunch of, dead in a barn that could kill us at any time. Like they killed this person. They killed Otis, which, by the way, Shane, you killed Otis when you guys went to go get the medical supplies. But that's besides the point, because he unlocks the barn, lets them all out, and the whole group just starts shooting down. So basically, Shane at this point is trying to assert his dominance as the leader and making the decisions that he believes Rick cannot make.
And it's interesting because with where Shane is at, this isn't a cut and dry situation. I mean, you have Shane, who took this mantle of leadership when Rick was basically left for dead. I mean, Shane didn't let the walkers just get to Rick. He took, like we said earlier, he took the time to barricade the room so that his friend would have at least not die a terrible death being torn apart by these walkers.
Yep. While in a coma.
Exactly. And he adopted a family that wasn't his own. And
he took in all these strangers that he doesn't know.
Correct. And so he did all this with the understanding of, okay, it's kind of at what point do you close the door? Right. You let these new people in, you've started to trust. And again, this episode is about trust. You started to trust these strangers to build a survival group, if you will, to make it through an unexplainably terrible, unexpected event.
Right.
So his friend comes back and you'd think, oh, yay, my friend's back. But oh, shit, well, we're going to figure this dynamic out. But then Shane, and to me, he's a sympathetic character. He gets cold shouldered by Lori.
Mm-hmm. Who he is, he becomes madly in love.
Correct. With. Because, and he did nothing wrong. He didn't go after his wife when she was alive. They kind of fell in love due to circumstance. And then in his viewpoint, I kind of can understand, like, yes, it's easy to say when everyone was alive as a police officer, okay, obviously we don't stop giving up looking for someone. We try, but you're essentially now looking for someone in a war zone.
Yeah, you're not in the old world. This is a new world. There's new rules.
New world and new rules. And I think at this point, Shane is still trying to cling to a world that doesn't exist anymore. I think he's trying to cling to notions and ideals and morals that maybe have a place in organized society, but you're not in organized society anymore.
Or Rick, right?
Sorry, yes, Rick. Yeah, Rick is trying to follow the rules to a game that has changed.
And you can kind of see that because as Shane is unlocking the barn and, getting ready to blow, all these people that Herschel has gathered. It's funny, I just called them people instead of walkers that have gathered, but Rick is holding on to this one and pleading with Shane, and he literally says, "Don't do this, brother."
Yep.
He calls him brother, "Don't do this, brother." Shane, stop this. Herschel, hold on to the, and like all the panic ensues. And of course, at the end of that scene, who appears out from the barn?
But zombified Sophia.
Yep. She comes out of the barn, and it's and right there in front of Carol too. She's like, there, it's confirmed. There you go, Rick. It's officially confirmed. You got your answer.
Yep.
And again, it kind of comes down to that idea of Shane feels that Rick is too hesitant, whereas Rick wants to think things through and try to figure out the right decision. And they're both not wrong.
No, if anything, the two of them combined would make a good leader. Individually, there's large gaps in their style, and this really kind of begins to drive a wedge between who Rick was kind of viewing as his strongest ally, and this begins Rick's descent into, one could call it paranoia, one could call it extreme skepticism, but it starts to begin to drive the wedge, and it begins to take, I guess you could say, naive Rick, and starts giving him a cold, hard look at the world that he now lives in.
Yeah.
And again, since today's topic is about trust, we look at, imagine, if you will, the person you trust the most, your best friend, your brother or your sister, the person that you view as your confidant. And you're put in these situations where things aren't right or wrong. It's not like Shane was like, "Oh, I want to kill a bunch of innocent people." And Rick's like, "No."
Yeah, no.
Shane's like, we both want the same thing. We want our family and our friends, our tribe, if you will.
They're both trying
to survive.
Rick, you may say Rick is trying to come from a place of more understanding, whereas Shane is trying to come from a place of more decisive, decisions that's going to, positively affect the group as a whole. I guess it's like a little bit of that old philosopher idea of you would know this better than I would, but it's almost like a little bit of like the trolley.
The old trolley.
They say, do you kill 5 people or 1 person? And,
correct.
And like, again, it's that thought experiment of there's no right or wrong answer. It's just what feels right.
Correct. And to build upon that for our listeners who are not familiar, I learned this in college by the example of Bob and the Bugatti. Bob and the Bugatti. So let me explain. Yes. So it's the same train car thought experiment. And it's the thought process is this, is you have Bob. Okay. Bob has worked his whole life. And his retirement plan is a Bugatti, which is a car. It's a very expensive car. And he he had this car. He bought it when it was relatively cheap, and he's take care of it. And he's, his whole life he has been being careful about this car. This car represents Bob's life.
Okay.
So at one point, Bob's Bugatti is parked on a train track, and Bob is next to a lever that has the ability to switch two tracks. So on one track, you have Bob and his Bugatti. Here you have Bob's Bugatti. On another track, you have and there's all kinds of stuff you can put there. You could put a school bus, you can put all kinds of stuff. So it comes to a point where Bob has to make a decision. Either the train hits his Bugatti and his life is ruined, or it hits whatever the other thing is. And the common example of it is, instead of the Bugatti and a person, is you do on one track is a single person tied down. On another track is 4 people tied down, and you control the lever. The train will kill one group. Do you let them kill 1, or do you let them kill 4? And you can even make it even more challenging by saying this one person is like your Mother Teresa. She's just a really good-hearted person. And the other track is for people you don't know.
Right.
Poor. I mean,
they could be kind souls, or they could be the most evilest.
Exactly. But there's
world.
4 lives on this track and 1 life on that track, and you don't have a choice. The train is going to kill one group. So the thought experiment is, which one do you do and why do you do it? So to use that metaphor, we have Shane and Rick standing, and they're both standing at the lever that switches the tracks. And on one track, there is the people that they know. So there's their group of people. On the other track is Sophia, who was someone they know,
but no longer is.
But is not there. She's separated. So they have a choice. Either they can let the train hit Sophia and save the group, or risk killing the group to potentially save Sophia. That's the choice they're left. And what makes the choice all the more difficult is it's no longer one person at the lever. It's 2 people and 1 lever. And they're trying to determine what is the right course. And again, neither is necessarily wrong. To go further into it, I think this is the difference between pragmatism and idealism.
Okay.
So by saying pragmatism, what I mean is people who look at the world as it simply is. All you can do is gauge the world based on your own empirical evidence, what you yourself are experiencing. So the pragmatist looks and judges everything based on how they're experiencing it. And they look at it as the world is what it is. And that is what Shane is doing. He understands it's not right. He understands it's not fair, but it is the way it is. Sophia ran off. It sucks. She didn't mean to run off. She got scared. They did try to look for her initially.
And then Carl had to get shot.
Exactly. And then other shit happened. So at that point, that sucks that Sophia died, or that, because it's what he assumes.
Yeah.
That sucks that she's not here and we can't get to her, but we can't risk killing everyone to potentially save her.
Right. And again, like you're saying, the idealist, Rick, he wants to hang on to what he believes is morally right, morally wrong.
Correct. And his thought is, well, if we're careful, maybe we won't miss people. Maybe we won't lose people.
Right.
And we can save everybody. He's getting hung up on the details, such as, well, Sophia's a child. She's an innocent. She can't defend herself.
She might just be held up somewhere.
Exactly. And all of his thoughts of, well, maybe she's hiding out. Well, okay, that's a big world out there.
Yeah.
It's a big, and so you're meant to see that it's a tough decision, but it's the first of several that erodes the friendship. What happens next?
So, to jump forward, Herschel is so distraught about what happened, he kind of runs off to a bar. Herschel is somebody who is like a recovering alcoholic. As soon as shit really went down and that whole thing, he just kind of went to a bar and got sauced. Like deeply sauced, like properly sauced. The real,
like a good set of ribs. He was well sauced,
very sauced. Super dizzy. Don't know where you're at. Rick goes off to find him. Finds him at the local drinking hole, and basically they run into another group of survivors that basically shit happens to where they're going to attack him. Rick, he he basically manages, through this whole fighting with this other group, he managed to capture one of the members, who was this kid, Randall. And him and Herschel, they bring Randall back, and they basically just have him locked away, sack over the head. And now the decision of, what do we do with this? Another, classic zombie trope. We have, a survivor of another group or so. We don't know this person very well. What do we do with them? Rick, eventually they come to a decision where, okay, we're going to drive off somewhere and, just drop this kid off. Well, this kid is a bit of a blabbermouth, and he says that he knows, Herschel and his daughters very well. And now Shane's like, shit, this guy knows where the farm is. We need to kill this guy. And Rick, of course, we can't just kill the guy. He doesn't, it basically becomes, do we kill this kid or not? And they get into this big fight about, what to do with this kid. And at some point during the argument, Rick says, stop acting like you know the way ahead, like the rules. Which Shane then replies, I don't, which then, Shane gives the old fighting words of, I don't think you can keep them safe. I don't think
so. That becomes a violation of trust for Shane.
And
so
Rick immediately socks him, and they go at it. And they're basically trying to kill each other.
So to further talk about trust here, it's at this junction. I mean, Shane hasn't agreed with Rick's choices up to this point.
No.
But it's really at this particular junction where Shane straight up calls out lack of faith in Rick's leadership
and
ability.
It's not even about discussing it with Rick anymore. It's about, I'm taking control. You don't know what you're doing anymore. You don't know what you're talking about anymore. You can't make decisions the right way. I'm taking over. And
again, not to play devil's advocate, but I gotta say, I kind of agree with Shane, because at this junction, Shane is proven to be right about Sophia. I mean, granted, Sophia's not dead. Well, she is dead,
right?
But he's right. She's lost.
But he did overstep his boundaries with, the whole opening up the barn and just opening fire on basically what was Rick's and Herschel's agreement.
Correct. But at the same time, again, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Shane was the devil. If it was not for Shane, Rick would be dead. If it was not for Shane, Lori, Carl, everyone up to that point, Herschel would have been alive because Herschel wasn't part of the original group.
No.
But if it wasn't for Shane, they all would have been dead. So,
or at least dramatically lost.
Exactly. So you have someone who was asked, or not even asked, who was expected, who was put into a situation where he has to make some tough decisions. And those tough decisions aren't easy. Decisions when you lead, you're constantly having to make choices where there is no right answer. It's shit no matter what choice you make.
This kid is tied up on the ground, pleading with them, saying, I didn't even know those guys. I would never do anything to hurt Herschel or, his Maggie. That's right. Maggie. God damn, I love you, Glenn. Way to get it, Glenn. but I would never hurt them or you guys. I would never hurt any of you guys. And this kid's really pleading for his life.
And he is, but at the same time, from Shane's point of view, I don't think he was in the wrong, because the kid was with a group of people that were going to kill him. Shane was going on with, okay, we'll set him, we'll do the old stray dog trick and set him out. But at that point,
he knows where the farm is.
I mean, let's just call it for what it is. He was willing to forgive the kid for attacking them in the first place. He was willing to say, okay, even though I don't particularly agree with this, I'll go along with it because, all right, no one really wants to kill a kid.
Right.
But at that point, he's like, well, and I agree. In his eyes, he was right about Sophia. That was their big first point of contention with Sophia. And it turns out Shane was right all along.
You're right.
He was right all along. Now you've got Rick, who's Shane didn't go out there with the express intent of killing the kid from the first moment.
Not until he started opening his mouth a little too.
Correct.
But
when new information was introduced, he was being pragmatic.
But if I will say to kind of, back up Rick here a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's nothing. The kid attacked Rick. True, but Rick was still willing enough to forget. If anything, this is more Rick's responsibility rather than Shane. Rick was the one who brought the kid in. This is Rick's responsibility. He knows that Lori and Carl is back at the farm. He knows the pros and cons of maybe, and basically he's almost thinking, well, there's nothing saying that you can't integrate this kid back into our group away from those other groups. He has, apart from attacking Rick, who he didn't know to begin with and was just a part of a group of people that he didn't know, he hasn't really done anything to, bring harm to the group other than being a part of those complete strangers that he didn't even know. So, to back up Rick, it is more of his responsibility over Shane. But Shane is still taking it upon himself to solve Rick's problem.
So, and this is going to kind of foreshadow something we're going to talk about here in a little bit, which is, so at this point in time, Rick is still very trusting of human nature, if you will. He's still very trusting of strangers, still very willing to give people second chances, because at this point, he hasn't really seen, he's seen some shit, but he hasn't really seen some shit because he wasn't there when the shit hit the fan.
And that really does bring up in their final standoff.
Correct, which we will get to.
Yes.
But Shane, at this point, Shane has seen some shit. He is umpteen number of tough decisions in. And again, to give some context, he didn't just go out there and like, I'm gonna kill this kid. Shit changed. And he was like, at the end of the day, my objective is to keep people safe. And he doesn't believe that Rick is able to do it. And on top of it, he's kind of got a chip on his shoulder because the woman he had fallen in love with completely threw him to the wayside because her estranged husband came back.
Who he thought was, well, they have a broken marriage anyway.
Exactly.
And, Carl is really taking a liking to Shane. Carl looks up to Shane, and Shane really takes pride in that whole role model stuff.
Exactly. So, Shane was impulsive, and that's who he is as a character. He was impulsive because at this point, he didn't want to have a conversation with Rick. Because if you're watching the show in this scene, the kid's on the ground. He's hands are roped.
He's tied up both hands and feet.
Yeah, he's on the ground and they're arguing, and the kid's watching them argue, and he realizes Shane wants to kill him, so he's pleading for his life. And Rick at this point he just needs a second. He's trying to think.
He literally says, "Just give me a second." Shane then yells out, "Well, when, Rick? When's this? When do you want? When's this decision coming?" He just feels like he's being too hesitant, where Rick is feeling more he's being cautious, and again, it's that whole nobody's right or wrong here. It's just, what feels right. And basically just holding on to that idealism of oneself, a little bit of an ego, and it's that egoism.
Yeah. There's ego there because they're both kind of alpha males, but there's also Rick is still trying to cling to his quote unquote humanity. He's trying to cling to a moral system that makes sense as part of a social contract. But in this world, the social contract's not really there anymore.
It's funny you mentioned that because early on in episodes, Dale, the one with the beard that had the RV, he basically had a conversation with Shane about make sure you don't lose your humanity. And this was shortly after Shane killed Otis.
Yes.
So yeah, he had that conversation with Shane about don't lose your humanity. This is a fucked up world, but you still need to be human.
Yes. So anyway, to fast forward some here, Shane and Rick get into it, and perhaps you can fill me in there. I don't remember what happens to the kid.
Basically, as they're fighting, a knife gets dropped on the ground, and the kid's trying to crawl to the knife, and he kind of gets to it and starts trying to cut himself free. But during the tussle, Shane kind of just about Shane throws a motorcycle on top of Rick to just kind of pin him down. Gotcha. And he goes after the gun, and he starts, waddling over, and he takes aim at the kid. But just as he is about to take aim at him, Rick then comes out of nowhere, tackles him, and they just start, tussling all over again. Eventually, Rick tells him, enough. I'm the one making the decisions here or whatnot. I forget exactly what he said, but basically, it's my charge. Yeah, it's my call.
Yeah,
it's my call. Shane then grabs like a large wrench, throws it over Rick's head into a window, and walkers start coming. coming out, and during which basically it basically turns into a whole thing where Rick saves Shane actually from being pinned into a bus. So so Shane kind of goes off into an old abandoned school bus, and he's surrounded by them. But the only way he's able to get out is with Rick and Randall's help. Basically Rick gets Randall, they get Shane, and they get out of there.
So what happens to Randall? Because I don't remember.
So with Randall, they take him back to the farm, and they're basically going to make it a democracy. We're going to have the group is going to decide, what do we do with this kid? What do we do with this guy? And they kind of all basically come to this agreement about, they put in their votes, and the votes don't go the way Shane likes. They basically they give sympathy to the kid, and it's like, we're gonna keep him alive and try to keep him in the group. Shane basically cuts at the night that he planned on killing Rick, he cuts Randall loose and takes him off in the woods and everything, and kills Randall by snapping his neck. And then basically goes, to the group, he escaped. And then everybody goes off to find them. Rick and Shane go off together, and that's when they get to the field. And basically, and Rick kind of knows what's up. He's kind of realized, like, this might be it. This is the last stand. And he says, so this is where you plan on doing it? And Shane goes, any place good as any, it's any good place. So, that's when they start their last stand in the field. And Rick basically says, you ain't gonna be able to live with this. And Shane goes, you don't know what I have to live with. You don't know what I'm able to live with. And basically goes, like, you got a broken woman, Rick. You got a weak son. They need me. They don't need you. You don't know how to fix them. I know how to fix them. And basically comes to this point where Shane is like, go ahead, Rick, shoot me. Because, they both have their guns.
Yeah.
And he's like, shoot me. Go ahead. Make the hard decisions. I dare you. You make the hard decisions. And Rick's like, nah, I ain't going to do that. And he's like, point your gun at me. And he's basically taunting Rick to point his gun at him. And he's like, you're going to have to shoot an unarmed man. And that's when it kind of gets into the whole thing where he's like, here's my, he kind of puts off his gun to the side. It's like, listen, nothing has happened yet. And starts inching closer.
And
to
again,
him.
You're referring to Rick's doing this.
Yes. Rick is inching closer to Shane. They're like, listen, nothing has happened yet. We can go back. We can go back to the farm where Lori is, where Carl is. Carl. We can go back. And then stabs Shane.
And kills him.
And as he's killing him, he's yelling out, damn you for making me do this. This isn't me. This is you. You did this, and he's just completely distraught because he's literally killing his friendship right there.
And not only that, but I think we can look that in a larger context is almost Rick killing old Rick.
Yes.
Because as Shane dies, Rick, this idealistic version of Rick, this Rick that the Rick from pre Cataclysm and post Cataclysm, this is post Cataclysm Rick killing pre Cataclysm Rick. Because at that point, not only is Shane dying, but he is symbolically killing this idealistic version of himself. You're making me do this.
He made the tough decision that Shane for the longest time was telling him, you got to make tougher decisions. Like you got to do what I have to do. And it becomes symbolic and I am going to jump slightly into the 9th season just because of one particular scene where they do bring Shane back, but it's in a dream sequence.
Gotcha.
So, but anyway, as you were saying.
So I want to build upon here because anyone who's listened to this show, they know I like to tell a story and then I like to draw some lessons from it. And we're going to tell a couple of stories here, but we're going to pause before we jump into our next story. And we're going to extrapolate some answers, some lessons from this. Mm-hmm. So when I hear about this, when I hear this dynamic between Shane and Rick, I see, and this pandemic that we are still technically kind of going through, but 2020 was of course some of the hardest part.
Oh, yeah.
In a lot of ways we came out the other side a little more like Rick after season 2 than we going into it as Rick and from season 1.
We We got pretty close to what the fans call the dictatorship, where he
Yeah.
declaims this is not a democracy.
Which is what we'll get into that here
Yep.
shortly. But I think of what it's like to lose the trust when you lose trust in someone who was your everything. Now, this can be in terms of relationships. This can be in terms of, you know, especially in today's society,
Co-workers.
well, co-workers, political figures,
Yep.
You know, friends, close friends. What happens when information changes and you begin to lose your trust in someone that you thought you always could trust? In my case, again, because, you know, I like to draw upon personal experiences here, I think a lot of my life post marriage. So, I mean, you knew my ex-wife. You knew me when you met me, I was with my ex-wife. The world at that point to me was kind of like pre-cataclysm Rick. I had these morals and blah, 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 you know, whatever you want to call it. I had my code of conduct, and she was my Shane. And as things go on and the relationship changed, information came out, just like with Shane, when you find out he did all this dark evil shit. And again, I'm not saying she did dark evil shit or anything.
Yeah, she killed Otis.
Yeah.
And you shot him in the leg and left him for the walkers.
But what I would gather is I learned was gaps were filled in after our marriage ended, and I began to learn more about what was going on behind the scenes. I also was in a very similar situation as Rick was. And it's when you realize this person that you knew is not the person you thought you knew. It just turns out they weren't the person you thought.
No.
And that's not saying that they were right
or
for
maybe
becoming the person that they were,
or that they were originally that person but have changed into
exactly.
something.
And I failed to realize that this person changed. And you come to the grips where you get to that moment where you're like, oh man, this is the person they are now. And it makes it even more challenging with, just like with the Shane situation, when the choices and the deeds and the decisions they made weren't cut and dry black and white situations, where now all of a sudden they chose a path different than your own. And you're now left with this situation where someone who you was such a core to your world, as you've lost faith in them, lost trust in them, you get to that your own field scene. And
Yeah.
I never obviously had a confrontation or anything, but I think, and this was even years after my divorce, where I think back to encounters that I had with my ex, and I think of things that were said. And then, of course, with new information that I've learned, you start to see deceptions. You start to see the rippling, the warping, when you realize that this person you thought is no longer, and we can say no longer, because I imagine obviously at some point she had to have been the person I thought she was, but you get a new realization on who this person is now. Yeah. And you get to your field moment where it's like, do you calmly say, oh shit, Shane, we'll go back to the farm?
Yeah, we'll go back to where Lori and Carl
exactly. We'll go back to the farm.
We can make this work again.
Correct.
We can rebuild this relationship.
And the old adage of head in the sand approach. Yeah. At what point, when you start to see the world as it really is? And
I think a lot, like Rick kind of showed that, because he knew as soon as he was down that field, he knew something. He knew it's going down.
Correct.
This is it. This is there's no turning back from this, even as he's giving that spiel of let's go back. And
but I wonder too, if in his own head, maybe he was still hoping that there was a turn back, point where you could turn back.
I would actually say even Shane felt that, because you can see that's actually one of the first times Shane is being hesitant in his decisions making. Here he is, he's gonna kill his best friend, somebody that he really trusted, even with his life, that he protected, took in all this stuff and everything. And as he's Rick is inching closer to him, he's hesitating, and he's you can kind of see like his thought process, like maybe we can go back and just forget this whole thing happened.
Yep.
And then get shanked.
But again, it's so, I mean, again, I can only draw from my own personal experience, and I just can't help but think. So, and even this was after my divorce, I'm encountering this person and I'm thinking I'm having great conversations and stuff. And then you find out from another point of view that like this person that you're interacting with is duplicitous. There's There's what you're seeing,
Right.
and then there's what actually is. And just like just like Rick had to kill Shane, and in theory kind of kill his old self in this false wishing the world was one way,
Right.
and acknowledging that the world is a different way.
The rules have changed, and
the rules have changed,
and you don't have access to the rule book.
Exactly. And I remember in my own mind having that moment where I realized that the old Tony, this naive kid, if you will, I had to let him go, because I realized that as I had this moment with my ex. And the funny part is this moment, she wasn't even in the room or in a conversation.
But
this all took place in my own head.
But you can still probably relate to that depressive anger that Rick felt of like, damn you made me
do this.
This is you. This isn't me.
Exactly. Because you think to yourself, and exactly. And for a listener, think of these moments where you've encountered these, where it's like you're forced to come to terms with the way something is, and because it's so against the way you wish it was, you feel that first fracture, or you feel that moment in your life where trust is lost.
Right.
Because this episode's about trust, and that's what happened when Rick sinks his knife into Shane's chest. It is the truest realization that trust is forever shattered. And because it was such a pillar of his existence, and this feeds right into what we're going to talk about next, that event, that shattering of trust, that crack in the facade, it spreads. And you can now segue into how this changes Rick.
Like I said, Robert Kirkman definitely draws a lot of inspiration from what did I say? The soap operas.
Yeah.
But a lot of this also, this whole dynamic between Rick and Shane plays out like a Greek play.
A lot of tragedy.
Yeah, a lot of tragedy.
Yeah.
But so basically after the whole thing, we get into the Ricktatorship area. And during this era.
Now, explain, because again, you have to keep in mind our listeners may not be too familiar. When you say Ricktatorship, what do you mean?
So the fans basically dub, pretty much going in from the end of the second season into the third season, the Ricktatorship. And it's basically the era where Rick is being decisive. He's kind of acting a little bit more like Shane in that sense, but he basically proclaims to the group, you can leave. No takers. Okay, well, if you're staying with me, this is not a democracy. And that's like the big thing. Then it's Rick is in charge, and what he says goes.
Gotcha.
So that's pretty much where the group leads into. And then, we can kind of get into, the whole political dynamic between like the governor and Rick, and the whole tyranny thing.
Yeah,
but basically, we won't worry about that. I know a lot of people have already talked extensively about that whole thing.
Yeah.
But basically during this era, the group actually has what they call the 3 questions. And it's, how many walkers have you killed? Which I guess is just basically addressing, can you hold yourself in a situation? Are you reliable in a situation? How many people have you killed? Again, kind of how can you handle yourself? But also, how many people have you killed? That's a pretty tough question to ask. And also, why? Maybe there's a good reason, but also you might also just be a piece of shit.
Yeah.
We don't know. So we're asking these 3 questions, and don't lie to us. And basically, I think this is a way of Rick setting boundaries. And basically the way that trust is broken is by breaking boundaries or trying to step over someone's boundaries. I'm setting these boundaries, don't cross them.
And so we're going to build into some real world applicability here.
Mm-hmm.
So in a lot of ways, this is Rick's overcorrection.
A little bit. Yes.
So the Ricktatorship was his overcorrection. So he went from a laissez-faire attitude, which means kind of a hands-off approach. And that's how he ran the group. Hands off. Somebody ran off. Oh, okay, we'll go find you, even though it's a pain in the ass and potentially people could die.
Yep.
But, we're all good people and we all stick together. It's part of my family. To Shane's betrayal and the loss of trust, to now it's fuck all you.
Yep.
If you're staying here, you're going to do everything I say when I say it. And if you don't, I'm going to put you down myself.
It's kind of almost a bit like Merle, where Merle is a fuck everybody attitude and trusts absolutely no one except myself. And
now, we're not going to get into
No,
Merle on this, but for those listening, so you can understand what's going on if you're not familiar with the show, Merle is a character who's introduced very early in the first season, who kind of disappears and comes back later on.
Yep.
Eventually we're going to do an episode about Merle and his brother Daryl, because they're very important to the show. But
and oddly enough, they're not in the comics.
Yeah, I know.
They were not in the comics. They were only brought, in fact, what's his name? Who plays Daryl?
Oh, Norman Reedus.
Norman Reedus. He was only supposed to be in for like a few episodes, but Robert Kirkman loved him so much, and it's like, let's just keep Daryl in, just keep writing him in. So they never really wanted to kill off Daryl because they loved the character so much.
So when Rick develops his 3 questions, this is him creating. So he originally trusts, I wouldn't say trust everybody, but he's definitely way more forgiving, and he's more of a nurturing presence than an authoritative presence. But then after the Shane debacle, he completely overcorrects into a completely authoritative position. Again, still for good reasons. He's trying to keep everybody safe, but he is hurt. His trust has been shattered. And now he, in a way, Shane finally got through to him. It took his death to do it, but he finally gets through to Rick and shows him that the world is not what you wish it was. It's a dark, cold, what is it? Was it John Hobbs? I think it was John Hobbs said, I forget what the question was, but it was, before the social contract, what was life? It was nasty, brutish, and short. And that's the world. So for those who aren't familiar with what the term social contract means, the social contract is what happened when we went from being individuals who occasionally interacted to society and quote unquote civilization. So the time before the social contract, life was nasty, brutish, and short. And in a way, The Walking Dead is a perfect example of what happens when the social contract devolves and goes back to nasty, brutish, and short. And now we have to somehow figure out how to redraft the social contract.
I mean, that whole thing ties into civilizations, trying to get along with one another and trying to, it's pretty much, it's just human nature.
It's more than that, though, because the social contract, to build into what we're talking about, the social contract is about trust.
Right.
So the social contract dictates that if JJ takes my shiny bauble, I trust in laws and rules that we have put forward to get my shiny bauble back. Before the social contract, you take my shiny bauble, I kill you, and then I take the shiny bauble back.
And then my son comes and kills you, and then your son comes and kills him.
Correct. Or just there's no rules, and
it becomes Hatfield McCoy.
Yeah. Well, no, it's more than that. It was a situation where survival became paramount.
Right.
But once we decided to come together and live, rules had to come into place. It's the same reason why when you see nonsense like, he's not my president. I didn't vote for the guy. Well, it doesn't matter if you voted for the guy.
We set our boundaries.
Exactly.
We made our rules.
With the rules state that whoever the most people that voted for him, he's now the de facto leader, regardless if you agree with it or not. That's what happens when you're part of the social contract. And The Walking Dead shows what happens when the social contract doesn't work. And it does a really good job of saying, how do we create a new social contract? And Rick killing Shane in a lot of ways is Shane finally getting through to Rick that the social contract has changed. He's told, in so many words, he's told Rick that. Rick didn't want to listen. He tried to show him the shit. It's not the same as it used to be. You can't just call the cops. When shit goes, you got to protect your own.
But to go to Rick's point, Shane did it in a way that kind of made you second guess Shane's decision-making ability. There's definitely different ways that you can portray an idea to somebody.
Yes.
And he probably went about portraying his ideas and decisions all wrong.
Correct. And to stick up with our theme, a lot of people like to demonize Shane because towards the end, Shane was just doing some evil shit. But
before that, he was like renowned for being, a role model, essentially.
And people also don't like to realize that in a lot of ways, Shane got, just like I think of my son. So my son kind of got left behind. He had a mom, and then suddenly he didn't have a mom anymore. And it's easy to look at him when he acts out, and a lot of ways, just like Shane did, where he acts out and he does stuff and he's angry. And it's easy to say you're in the wrong. But when you stop and you realize what was done to Shane, what was done to my son to make him act this way, well, in a lot of ways, they were both left behind.
Right.
Shane was in a loving relationship that and you have to imagine, they don't show it in the show, but you have to imagine it took time for them to fall in love.
Well, they kind of show a little bit of that in the sense, like I said, in the comics, they just pretty much just make it a whole jealous affair.
Gotcha.
And that's why, they really but in the show, they really evolved it into the back character of Shane a lot better, with like understanding his motives beyond just pure jealousy. Like how we were saying, just about this whole egoism,
Yep.
this ideal of leadership, and who's in charge of what, and just all the sorts of the decisions that in a work, again, in decisions that there is no right or wrong answer. It really puts your character to the test, your actual character to the test of like, what would I do? And a lot of times you don't know what you would do until you're put in that situation.
Exactly. And I think that I think that's what frustrated Shane so much, is Rick was trying, in a way. It's like when Rick would find himself in these situations, he would stop and say, well, what would I do? And then he would postulate and he'd think about it and he'd daydream about what choice while shit's still happening. And Shane's just like, no,
he
you
would
act.
necessarily daydream, but he was definitely far more cautious in the sense of like, there's definitely consequences to actions.
Correct.
And the actions that we take, those consequences could come back to bite us on the ass.
Correct.
Like it did Shane.
Exactly. So now Rick's got his 3 questions, and we're going to evaluate each of the 3 questions here. And we're going to try to apply them to how they would count to the real world. So what's question number 1 again?
Question number 1 was, how many walkers did you kill? And I guess it's basically just, how well can you handle yourself?
Okay. So do you think it's more of a how well can you handle yourself, or do you think it's more along the lines of, do you have it in you to kill a walker?
Right. That definitely does make sense, because there's definitely characters who on the show who basically just didn't necessarily kill their way to survival.
Correct.
They just ran away enough to where they were never caught in a situation, or they were just ahead of the horde, so to speak, to where they didn't have to worry about killing too much. So yeah, that can definitely be that's the thing, is like, if kind of going back to like Herschel a little bit, you have, say, a family member or a friend, if I was a walker, would you have it in you to kill me? And honestly, I would kind of hope so.
And it's interesting that becomes one of Rick's questions, because that was the thing that Shane hated so much about Rick, is Rick wouldn't make the hard decision. So that question, how many walkers have you killed? And not only is it a question of, can you or will you kill a walker if presented, but it also now becomes a paramount question of trust.
Yes.
Like, if walkers are coming, are you going to run? If walkers are coming, are you going to fight? And how many? And the how many is more of just how to quantify how experienced they are.
Right.
Because
that could also say, well, if he's killing just all these walkers willy-nilly,
yeah,
he might just come back and kill. He might just be willing to kill just about anybody.
Not only that, but it's also a big turning point for Rick in as far as who he trusts, because before, he's willing to take on people who could not necessarily defend themselves.
Well, if you remember,
now he's only interested in people who aren't going to be a burden on him. So it's very interesting from a trust standpoint how he changed between pre-Shane's death and post-Shane's death.
Because if you remember in the first episode, who kind of saves Rick is that one guy, I can't remember his name.
I can't remember. He shows up later on.
Yep. Too. But basically the whole thing was, it was him and his son. And basically his wife was turned to a walker, and she would just show up at the front door every now and then. Very eerie.
Yeah.
Very eerie. But basically,
Morgan.
Morgan, that's right. And he didn't have it in him. There's a scene where Morgan, has the rifle at the top of the attic and he's aiming at his wife and he cannot pull the trigger. And we come to find out later that his wife, who's a walker, kills his son.
Yep.
So now, because of his indecision to kill his wife, ends up killing his son.
Which is fascinating because it, pre Shane's death, Rick would have completely understood the inability to pull the trigger. Absolutely. He would have completely understood. In fact, he would have almost seen it as a virtue of Morgan. But post Shane's death, now that becomes a liability.
Yeah. Or, it's kind of funny. How would post Shane really feel about that? Because, the rules have changed.
Exactly. The rules have changed. And the rules about trusting people have changed.
Yes.
So second question
is, how many people have you killed? So now we're not talking about whether or not somebody is, the undead. Yep. This person's alive. This person is, a survivor, just like yourself. How many of them have you killed?
And I think this is even more so a pointed question about, he's trying to weed pre Shane's death Rick out from post Shane's death, because pre Shane's death, he really wasn't. I mean, I believe he had actually killed some people at that time, but it was all pretty justified. Kind of a kill be killed situation.
I'm trying to remember. I remember Shane. So Shane killed Otis, and that was the big thing on the show because, again, Otis was helping Shane, and Shane basically, because they were both limping away from a horde, Shane shot Otis in the leg, took the backpack off of Otis and just left him there to slow down the horde.
Correct. It's the whole, you don't have to run faster than the bear. You just have to run faster than your
the person. Yeah, exactly. That's really what that was. And so you can kind of even gauge that question of like, you've killed people, but I guess that really ties into what our third question is going to be. But
Correct.
how many people have you killed can still kind of mean a lot of things.
Well, I think in my opinion, one, it's going to show you how green of a person is here. Because at this point in time, I mean, we don't know exactly how long it's been since the outbreak, but it's been long enough that anyone they're encountering at this junction in time should have at least killed somebody.
Probably. Most likely.
Yeah. And if they haven't, it comes to a question of, well, are they a liability? Can they be trusted?
Yep.
Which of course feeds us
if we get attacked, if we get attacked, are they going to be able to help the group?
Yes. And of course, by asking how many people, because someone's like, oh, I've killed 400 people.
Exactly.
Okay.
All right. Well, let's get into our third question. Why?
What the hell? Were you just mowing people down? Like, what the fuck is going on?
Oh, this was before the apocalypse.
Oh yeah, I'm a serial killer. I've killed like 150 people.
Wait, what?
So that of course then brings us into the last question of it, which is why. And this is again where we're getting glimpses of pre-Shane's death Rick, because the why matters. It still matters to him.
Yeah.
Why have you killed? Are you killing them because they were taking something from you? Or are you killing them because you wanted to take something from them? Right. So it's showing that Rick hasn't, post Shane's death, Rick has not abandoned a code of ethics, but he is still trying to redefine his code.
Right. He's still hanging on a little bit to his old self, but he is still definitely morphing into this new person, this new character.
What I think of, and I don't remember how long after this scene happens, but one of the scenes that really sticks in my mind, and it's for the listeners, it's been years since I've watched the show, but I remember there's that scene where it's Rick, Carl, and I want to say Daryl, and they walk into I think it's a store, and this other group comes in. And you can tell Rick gives these people every chance. I mean, this is definitely way more cautious, Rick, at this. This is post Shane's death. And he's like, hey, why don't you get your stuff and just, mosey on out of here. And you could tell, because from a viewer, you're not meant to believe yet if these people are dangerous, but the hesitancy in Rick's face.
Right.
You're like, get your stuff and go.
Yeah. Before we have a problem.
Exactly. He gives them every chance in the world to mosey on their day. And these guys are like, oh no, hey, why don't we join up? Why don't we?
Yeah.
And he's like, nope.
That's not how this works.
Nope. And eventually what happens is Shane straight up kills them all. Or I'm sorry, not Shane. Rick straight up shoots them all.
It's funny you kind of misplaced using Shane because he's kind of, because maybe old Rick would have.
Exactly. Old Rick would have been way more naive, way more trusting. And again, it's all about trust. At this point, he's starting to get a better understanding of what the world has become versus what the world was.
Because he only got firsthand experience this from waking up from a coma.
Exactly.
So shit was already haywire.
Yes, he didn't go through, because you got to imagine Shane was probably like Rick during a period of time.
He probably started learning the new rules slowly, whereas Rick was just trial by fire.
Exactly. So Shane went through that oh, I trusted people and it bit me in the ass.
Yes.
So when Rick sees him, Rick doesn't see the transformation that Shane's had to make. So, and it's just like people who are going through situations at different stages.
Yeah.
But I remember this scene so vividly because it's kind of, and you find out later, maybe he made a good choice, but you see Rick and you see the very different version of Rick. Nice. And they shot it brilliantly from a cinematic standpoint, because he's got his cowboy hat on. He's very much an old-timey sheriff looking dude at this point in time. And when he kills these guys, there's no fucking around. He straight up boom, 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 boom. He kills them all. And it's another example of this new Rick. The rules have changed. He acknowledges the rules have changed now, and trust is now not something he's giving away, which is what he was doing before.
Yep. Rick knows why Rick knows how many people he's killed, and he knows why he's killed them.
Exactly. So by asking this to people, how many people have you killed, but why? He's trying to find intention, because he doesn't trust anyone anymore.
No.
So he went from trusting everybody until they gave him a reason not to trusting no one until they gave him a reason to trust.
It's that those extremisms of what do you call that? The scale between
the spectrum.
Yeah, it's that spectrum of trusting too much and trusting not enough.
Exactly.
And trying to find that balance.
And that's what we're going to talk about now. So we've told our stories. Now we're going to talk about some real examples in our own lives of trying to find the sweet spot. And understand, by the end of this, I'm not going to have a golden rule or an answer for you guys. Yeah. It's a gray area, pun intended. Yeah. It's a gray area. And at what point, and my advice when you're trying to navigate a world that has changed, and now that we're on hopefully the backside of the pandemic, the world has changed.
Oh yeah.
Regardless of your stance regarding vaccination versus non-vaccination, or mask or anti-mask, the rules have changed in the world, not just in the way people are, not just between, wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, or vaccinated or not vaccinated. It's in everything. Look at the labor situation we have right now. We have nobody wants to work. Well, rules have changed. Not only do you have people that you have an expanded unemployment system that never existed before, but now you have people that just like the world, just like Rick's perspective changed after he killed Shane. You now have people that are like, well, I don't know that I want to go and work for $10 an hour, busting my ass. Like, it's like this world changed, and now you have people who don't trust the system anymore.
Yep. I remember early on in the pandemic where there was like a grocery store manager, and he basically, says like, I got into this job not to be, I didn't realize taking this job was going to make me a frontline worker one day. And it's funny how that whole thing just changed he had a position that really wasn't all that important, and then it became one of the most important jobs.
Exactly. And not only that, but we think of in the early days of the pandemic, you think of people like grocery store workers, people who, again, I'm not bashing anyone who works those jobs, but jobs that were generally more of your entry-level stuff. When we all enter the workforce, some of those more, again, I'd say the word lower tiered, but they're just more starter positions.
I always just said, hey, work is work. However you can make $1, you're making $1.
Yeah.
So work is work.
But we have these situations now where you had people thrust into these sudden leadership or sudden important roles, and compensation wasn't coming. Nope. So to draw this back to the story, you had someone like Rick who woke up from a coma, who's now all of a sudden this leadership role has been thrust upon him. But you have these people who are working these jobs that before maybe, they hated their job or whatever, but now it's like, I did all of this. I never got recognition or compensation. And now the world wants me to go back to it. And it's like once bitten, twice shy.
Yeah.
How do you trust that the system is going to be there for you when the shit hit the fan and the system wasn't?
Right.
So, I mean, that's just more of a societal example, but I even think relationships. Think of how you yourself, think of how your relationships changed when the world flipped upside down.
Yeah.
When now all of a sudden, I mean, I remember here in Pennsylvania, we were at some pretty tight lockdown from what was it, like end of January until about April.
Yeah.
It was about a 3-month span.
I would say even close into May.
Yeah,
May
it was
really, it really.
So about 3 to 4 months where people, and some people just straight up weren't going out. I mean, I think of the relationship that I was in at the time, and it wasn't the greatest relationship to begin with. It obviously had some issues, but I think of being home because at the time, my girlfriend at the time she lived with me. So it was me, her 2 kids, Traylon. We were all big family. And all of a sudden the kids come home from school one day, and I always remember this, like I got a call 20 minutes or so before they came home that just said, oh, by the way, until further notice, we are now virtual. So we're like,
wow.
Now anyone who's listening to this who has kids understands that sending your kids to school is one of the best things in the world because that gives you time without them. Now you shove 3 kids and 2 adults into an unexpected situation where they're now around each other 24 hours a day. You can't go to the store. You can't go do this. You can't do that. Shit changed. Just like Rick woke up from the coma to a world.
We'll be back in the coma.
Exactly. That's kind of what happened. And trust it's been shaken.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy the world we're in now.
Yeah. Like I say, a lot with me, like trust wise, is just, and like I said, I'm not going to talk extensively about politics, but a lot of my distrust has definitely come from like friends and family that I was like, we've had our differences, but it's cool. They have their way of thinking. I have mine. It's all, especially like close family members.
Yep.
And then just around 2016 or so, like politics just became everything.
Yeah.
And it was like, and it got to the point where it was like relationship breaking.
Yeah.
You basically, if this person didn't have your same beliefs, or if they didn't, it just got, I don't know what the atmosphere was, or like what was in the Kool-Aid, but it erupted into this idea that, well, if you're not in the group, then you're out, and then you're the them.
Yeah,
you're the them. If you're not,
it wasn't us versus them mentality.
It became that. Yeah, and I've definitely lost a lot of friendships, and there was definitely family members I just did not want to talk to anymore because I just did not want to get into these discussions.
Yeah,
and I definitely lost my trust and my opinion about a lot of them. I've had a fair opinion about a lot of people, and then that opinion kind of dropped.
And we know a lot of the same people, and
Yeah.
I agree wholeheartedly. Institutions and places that I thought would always be part of my life are no longer part of my life, and that's because, and again, I'm only 36. You're what?
I'm just now 30.
You're just now 30. So there's a 6-year difference between us. But as far as presidents are concerned, we pretty much experience the same political reality for our life.
Mm-hmm.
And I can say in my lifespan, again, I don't want to get hyper political. Now we're going to talk politics here, but I'm not going to get partisan. I'm not going to say one side or the other.
Right.
But for those who don't know, we live in Pennsylvania. We are in an ultra conservative swath of Pennsylvania.
The way I explain it, I say we live in the part of Pennsylvania that has Confederate flags outside of some houses.
Yeah, because we're in the north and there's Confederate flags everywhere.
Exactly. That's the part that we live in.
Yes, we live in an ultra conservative section of Pennsylvania where there's not a lot of open minds. No. Or maybe there's not a lot of open people with open minds.
Right.
Or
at least the people that express their opinions louder.
Yes.
The loudest, those are the opinions that
are the opinions that are heard.
Yes.
And I can definitely say when 2016 came, it was a rough presidential election because you had the Republicans with a very cult leader-esque individual, and then you had the Democrats with also a cult leader individual, just from a different viewpoint.
Yeah, really more of the I would almost say like too much. I think at that point, a lot of people were just fed up with what they thought was, the institution.
Yeah, the status quo.
Yeah.
Everyone was getting real tired of it. We had just we were it was rough. I mean,
Yes.
America's not exactly known as being progressive. They love to think they are, but
In some ways, but not in others.
yeah, not in others. I mean, we had our first minority president for 2 terms, and the 2016 election was a huge backlash
A
because
lot of certain people felt very spited.
yes, they did. Yes, they did. And it was an overcorrection of the worst possible kind.
Yep.
And then you had a 2016 election that was full of such venom. I mean, elections always been contentious,
Mhm.
but this particular election, things were said. I mean, stuff that we might jokingly say from one to another, but stuff that you should never hear come out of a leader's mouth. Just venom and hatred and people giving. I mean, you had all these racists, let's just call it what it is.
Yep.
A lot of these racist people who kept their racism quiet because society is like, fuck you,
Yeah.
you're not going to be doing this
Yeah.
outside. Well, now all of a sudden these people became emboldened after the 2016 election. These people
I can say that now.
exactly. So now you have people shouting all this racist rhetoric. I mean, you had the Charlottesville.
Yeah, it was Charlottesville March.
Yeah,
that certainly, we say March.
Yeah, it was not a march. It was.
It definitely turned into something else.
Exactly.
But it basically gave a lot of those people that, like you said, would stay hush hush normally because they don't want to be the bad
exactly
people. But just for some reason they got in their heads like, oh, we get to be loud and proud about us hating other groups of people. And
hatred got a megaphone.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was.
And to try this into what we're talking about, that was in a way we all kind of woke up after the 2020 or 2016 election to a world that had changed.
I think I specifically remember seeing you and our friend Lance and being like, well, that should happen, right?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it was such an unexpected result. Again, I'm not trying to
right.
It was an unexpected result, to put it mildly. And the world changed. We were all, Rick, walking out of that hospital.
Oh, yeah.
Because people we had known for years, decades, people who were family to us, now all of a sudden, the rules changed.
Yep.
What you could talk about, who you could trust, it all changed. The us versus them mentality completely changed. And it was being further. I mean, we were divided before the 2016 election,
but it was manageable. We were divided.
That's a great term, manageable. I like that.
We were divided, but we could still, but it was still, what's the whole we were still trying to reach across the table.
Yeah, there was still some compromise trying to be had.
Yes.
To a degree. But then the 2016 election happened, and all of the nonsense that happened between 2016 and 2020
flipped the table.
Exactly. The rules completely changed. You couldn't, and again, we're not going to say names or anything, but there are people that we knew that if you voiced your opinion, if it wasn't in line with what they were preaching, you were literally viewed completely different.
Yep.
And I've had many, and again, we won't mention any names here, but I have several people, one of which I'm incredibly close to, who was an outspoken critic of the administration. And that person had to change everything. Yeah. Like this individual became fearful to post things on social media because of death threats, because of violence. And it's literally, though, I mean, we talk, this title of this episode is Rick Grimes and learning to trust in an untrusting world.
Yeah.
We all woke up to a world there where you couldn't trust people anymore.
And so you basically had to set your boundaries. You had to
develop your 3 rules.
Yes,
your 3 questions. Your 3 questions.
Yep. You had to get your 3 questions out.
You had to
just to gauge.
Yep.
And I think a lot of that is like, if you're going to try to trust somebody, you do have to gauge them and try to figure out what, like you're saying, what their intentions are, what their deal is, who they really are as a person. And that's very hard to do.
It is.
It's very hard.
It's very hard to do. So I've been rewatching Game of Thrones recently, and there was actually just a scene I just saw in an episode a couple of days ago that kind of ties into this. Is in a lot of ways, when we all woke up after the 2016 election, just like Rick woke up in the hospital, we woke up into a war that we didn't realize had started.
Yes.
And that's exactly what Rick woke up to. He woke up to a war that he never knew started.
Nope.
It was already well under its way.
And it was trial by fire.
Well, there's a scene. Okay, so there's a scene in Game of Thrones where Davos, he's this like, they call him the Onion Knight. Okay. So exactly. Yeah. So he just wakes up on this little inlet, this little chunk of land, because he was in a sea battle. His ship got blown up. He got thrown, and he wakes up on this little inlet of land, and he's, sun-baked and caked, and he's died. He's clearly.
Oh yeah, he's not in good shape.
No. And he sees a ship, and he manages to flag it down, and a rescue boat comes over. And a rescue boat gets there, and the first thing, they can clearly see he's starved. He's all fucking, just imagine being at sea. He's in rough shape.
Yeah.
But the first thing they ask him is, "Who'd you fight for?"
Oh, dip.
Well, that's so similar to what I saw between 2016 and even now. I mean, let's just bring it up, even to today's date.
Yeah.
One of the first things when you meet new people, one of the first things is, who'd you vote for?
Oh yeah, those people. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like, holy shit.
I got a lot of that from work.
Yeah. Who did you vote for? And just like Davos, and I know we're crossing fandoms here, but just like Davos stood there like, shit, because he knew who he fought for. But he was like, oh, I gotta figure out
who did they fight for.
Exactly. I need to match my answer to who they fought for, or they're gonna leave my ass on this island.
I know. It's like, oh shit, 50-50. Let's go.
Yep.
Let's go. Let me think. Wait, who did they say who he picked?
Oh yeah. He picked the right person. He guessed, and he was truthful. He was truthful. The one true king, Stannis Baratheon, and they're like, you see them smile, and he's like, oh, thank God, it was right.
That kind of ties in a little bit to what the one episode that you did about the Game of Thrones.
Yes, when I did the Eddard Stark episode.
Yeah, that was a brilliant episode. But I just want to say, did you want me to get into the last little?
Yeah.
I wanted to do? So this is into the 9th season, and this is really the only thing I'm going to talk about, the 9th season.
Which I have not watched. So this
I know, which I'm still a little bit far behind. I'm far from the 9th season, but I'm still a little bit up to date. But again, like, holy shit, they got to 9
I know, that's
I know. I know. Props to them, because it's hard to get a show to 3 seasons.
Yeah.
So basically, Rick is bleeding out to death.
Okay.
Well, he's bleeding out. And he basically has these dreams, and a lot of these dreams kind of revert back to season 1.
Okay.
And he still is in his season 9 getup, bushy beard, just dirty looking, and he's riding in on the horse from season 1.
Okay.
And he comes up to the cop car that him and Shane were first in the first episode.
So to reference back to, for our listeners,
yep.
At this point we have a grizzly hobo looking Rick, who basically is revisiting that car scene that we were talking about in the very beginning.
And it's clean cut Shane, very, in his police uniform, and he's he's eating the hamburger and fries that they were eating in that first scene. And I just saw this scene, and I do love it, because basically it's, Shane's obviously not there. He killed Shane, but everything that Shane is saying is pretty much what Rick is projecting Shane would say.
Gotcha.
Or thinking what he would say. And they're kind of, how like friends, they kind of tell like those like dark, or like pretty much like those jokes that you can only tell to a close friend.
Morbid humor.
Yes, exactly. Basically, because if you remember, Shane impregnated Lori with
no. So for our listeners who don't know, because we didn't talk about it, one of the subplots is Lori gets pregnant and discovers it's Shane's child.
It's very clear the timing wise it was with Shane. So he does the joke, and it's like, I'm looking for my family. He's like, well, Rick, some could say that it's actually my family you're looking for. And he's like, how is my daughter doing? And he goes, well, good thing she doesn't have your nose. And like, they just start fucking with each other a little bit. And again, this is all just what Rick is projecting Shane would say. But he gets to, they get to the point where, Rick kind of says like, I didn't want to. And he's like, but you took, and he's like, I didn't want to do it. And he's like, but you took it. And he's basically saying, I'm sorry, but Shane is basically saying, you need to forget that shit. He's basically, in a way, like he's using Shane to forgive himself, but you could also see that he still cherishes that old friendship,
Camaraderie.
that he had with Shane, that he really misses that. He really wanted that to stick. He really wanted to keep that. And that's like, nobody really wants to lose a friendship.
No.
Nobody wants
Or a relationship or anything.
Relationship or anything. It just, shit just happens.
Shit does happen.
Shit just happens that way. But that, I don't think that's really any reason to distrust the world per se, or to just outright distrust everybody just because of what this one person did. And I guess Rick kind of had to learn that through
his adventures.
But yeah, you can see, I just wanted to talk about that because I really did love how he still held on to that old friendship with Shane, and that he really did care so much about Shane. And when when they're in that field and he's saying, "Damn you for making me do this," he really did make him do that.
He did.
He kind of did.
So it's kind of funny how these things work out. So for the listeners, we knew a topic for today, but that was about the extent of our conversation as far as planning it out. We knew it was going to be a free form. Well, it's funny how these things work out, because you tell that story, and it kind of brings me to my closing message, if you will, of the episode, which is, I said earlier, I can't tell you how to trust in an untrusting world. I can't give you a guide on how to learn to trust people.
We're still figuring it out for ourselves.
Exactly. But recently, very, very recently, I had a situation, and again, this kind of comes to trust. I had a situation where I got messaged by an anonymous person. And I say anonymous because it was clearly a fake profile.
Oh, yeah.
Clearly it's like Stabby McStabberson. What? I don't remember what it was, but clearly a fake profile. So, who knows who's on the other side of it.
True.
And it was a fake profile with someone looking to get some dirt on a person I once knew. And this person I once knew had betrayed me. Straight up betrayed me. And it was a person I had considered that I was close with. I considered this person a close person. The betrayal was unexpected. And it was interesting because, obviously the first thing when I get Stabby McStabberson's message is, okay, well, clearly this is not a real person. And then
what did this other guy do? Now Stabby McStabby wants dirt.
So Stabby McStabberson's like, and I'm going to paraphrase, hey, I want dirt on McJobber. So Stabby McStabberson wants dirt on McJobber, and I'm very much post Rick at this point. I'm like, who the fuck are you?
You've already stabbed Shane in the field.
Yeah. And I'm like, okay, well, first of all, I don't answer questions from anonymous people. So then Stabby McStabberson says, oh, well, my name is Bobbert. Whatever. Obviously going to use fake names here. And I'm like, all right, well, Bobbert, and Bobbert's like, well, I know for a fact that I know this person betrayed you. I know you got bad blood against this person. And part of me was like, I was at two schools of thought, and I was like, well, I should unload because I've got just oodles of dirt. And I was like, well, I could unload all this dirt. But instead, my response was, well, Stabby McStabberson, I'm not going to unload dirt to somebody I don't know, because I don't know who the hell I'm talking to. I'm like, I'm not going to unload dirt to somebody I don't know about someone I did know. And of course, Stabby McStabberson's like, well, this person screwed you over. Yes, you're not wrong. No. This person screwed me over. But something inside of me said, you know what? Just because this person screwed me over, I guess it's safe to assume they had their reasons, even though those reasons could be completely wrong. It could be bullshit.
You basically asked them your three questions. I did. Without asking
I did. So I'm talking to Stabby McStabberson, and I'm like, well, and just a couple of things I was like, well, yes, I obviously was betrayed. What this person did was bullshit, but I still, and to kind of to come back to what you just said, by the end of the conversation with Stabby McStabberson, I realized that I kind of had a chance to forgive this person for wronging me without ever having to deal with that person again.
True.
I was able to forgive them and move on with my life, because I got to a point, and I guess this is sort of my message. I can't teach you how to trust in an untrusting world, but what I can tell you is you need to ask yourself, at what point is carrying all that negativity and that mistrust? It's important to have your three questions.
Yes, to have your boundaries.
Yes, you have to have your boundaries. but don't box the entire world off.
Right. Don't keep your boundaries only 1 foot in front of you.
Exactly. Don't walk around with a box that's 1 foot by 1 foot, because you may miss out. And that negativity and all that mistrust, it can really change and darken your world, just like it did to Rick.
Right. Forgiveness definitely does tie into trustworthiness quite well.
It does. And one of the big problems I think a lot of people have is they mistake forgiveness for weakness.
That's true.
And I think Rick had that problem. He thinks, obviously he trusted everybody, and then the Shane thing happened, and now he trusts nobody. But he does evolve as the show goes on to find that kind of middle ground where he's not walking around with his box 1 foot by 1 foot.
And you actually see that quite well with his relationship with Daryl.
Yes.
That's actually, we're not going to get into that.
No, because that's a whole nother episode.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, you definitely see how well Daryl and Rick has grown to trust each other, especially when their relationship started off with you handcuffed my brother to the top of a roof and left him to die. And then, they eventually grew to actually trust one another and befriend each other almost the same way that Rick trusted and befriended Shane.
Which again, so he did learn to trust.
He still learned to trust in an untrustworthy world.
So I think part of surviving, navigating this world that we live in now, navigating this untrusting world, I think one of your first steps is learn to forgive yourself, learn to forgive other people, and understand that things change. Yes. And that's both a good and a bad thing.
Yep.
Just like Rick failed to realize at first that the world had changed, that the rules had changed. He failed to realize it, and he never learned it until he had to kill his best friend.
Yes.
So first of all, understand that things change. The rules can change, but also understand that people who maybe at one point in time you hated or despised or didn't trust, people can change in a good way, just the same as they can change in a bad way. And understand that when presented with new information, evaluate it. Yes. Don't walk around, like JJ says, with your boundary 1 foot in front of your face, because in the end you're gonna miss out on so much.
It's funny because you and I have talked about how we would have hated each other in high school, but here we are.
We're good friends. We're best of friends.
Yeah.
And it's so, and this will be my last little story before we sign off here. So we talk about, just like JJ said, if we'd have known each other in high school, I was a fucking asshole. He'd have hated me.
And I was just some dirt poor punk kid that just fuck everybody.
Yeah, like I was the dirt poor asshole. He was the dirt poor punk kid. And we never would have liked each other. But now we're so close to, obviously I've talked about Saber School before, and anyone who jumps on the YouTube page, they see it. Well, just today.
Yes, please give our Saber School Instagram a like.
Yeah, and we're training right now. Well, so case in point, we trained earlier today. We're building a fight for Sci-Fi Valley Con. Well, anyone who has ever been in Saber School, JJ and I are kind of like, I don't know, we work really well together. We can put a fight together in 5 minutes, really. And I was thinking about it earlier before we recorded this episode, and I realized it's because we completely trust one another to fit into the theme of today's episode. And to tell the funny story, to quote it up. So today we're working on putting our segment together, and we realized part of it includes what's called a wheel kick. So yes. So part of it involves a wheel kick. So there's a scene, or there's a part in the fight where I come in and I try to like backhand slash him in the waist, and he blocks it with his saber. So he blocks it, and then we realize the next natural thing is for him to complete his circuit and wheel kick me in the face. Well, I trust him explicitly.
I just want to point out, this is like the third time we tried.
This was at least the third time. And then ironically, it was the third time we did it. And the first time I was like, hey, other members of Saber School, watch this. So I'm like, watch this. He does the wheel kick. And I honestly think it was my fault. I was so enamored by the move, like how cool it had to fucking look. I never moved my head, and he wheel kicked me right in the nose. I mean, it was perfect. Like if you're trying to teach someone how to land a heel kick, it should look like what he just did.
I immediately was like, I hit him. The moment
there was
the
no
moment
guess about
that
it. I got a
I know
big
the moment
nose.
that my foot glanced across it, I was like, oh shit, I hit him. Oh no.
And he did, straight on heel, right to the side of the nose.
I had to hug you and I'm like, I'm so sorry.
And you
I'm
know
so
what?
sorry.
It was, and I didn't care. I mean, because one, that's just who I am. I'm
I
like,
know
did it
you-
look cool?
And then that's the thing with like our dynamic is like, I know you didn't care, but I still feel bad.
Exactly. But it's about trust. I mean, literally, we put fights. I mean, to give you one more example from today's practice, there's a scene right towards the end of our little segment where I throw a flying jumping knee, whatever you want to call it. I throw a jumping knee into JJ's stomach.
Yes.
And Bethany, who's been on a few episodes of ours, she's part of Saber School. She was like, hey guys, how about instead of doing it this way? And she does a lot of stage combat.
Right.
She's
again,
like,
she's not wrong.
She's not wrong, but here's where trust comes in. She's like, throw it this way, because then you won't risk injuring him. And of course, my immediate response was, I get what you're saying, Bethany, but no, because JJ put a block up and she's like, don't block, JJ. He'll do it this way. And I'm like, no, JJ, block. And she's like, what do you mean? And I explained to her the difference between a fighter, which is what we are. We train this shit for real.
And a choreographer.
And a choreographer. Someone who,
and
like, if you were teaching it to someone who's never fought before.
And just the way that we do it, we always kind of resort back to nothing that's wrong with like purely choreographed fighting, but we always kind of revert back to more realistic.
Exactly.
Fighting.
I mean,
that's just our nature.
And it's, well, when I started Saber School and people ask us what's Saber School is fight choreography done by real fighters.
Yes.
And so where that plays in is I said, no, Bethany, because he knows in the heat of the moment, because when we do our fights, we really get into them.
Yep.
I'm going to throw a legitimate knee. Now I know not to fucking break his sternum.
No, you know how to hold back.
Yep. But he knows to block. So if it comes on a little heavy, it's not going to matter. And it's about trust.
Yep.
It's all about trust. And just the same as we would have hated each other if we would have known each other at an earlier age, we don't hate each other. We trust each other more than anyone else. It's why we can put a fight together in 5 minutes that would take me weeks to train with someone else, because I trust. If JJ says throwing a wheel kick, he trusts, and this is where trust is two streets. I failed in my part. The way it works is I know JJ is going to throw this kick as close to my face as he can, and he knows I'm going to either get out of the way or I'm going to turn with it to mimic the hit.
Yes.
So it's about trust. So to tie it all together in a tight bow, I know the world still kind of sucks, everybody.
Yep.
It's a new world and a new way to navigate things.
And you know what? The world kind of always sucked, and it's never going to get better.
Exactly. It's not. It's just a new type of suck right now.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, you just have to learn to navigate.
Yes. So my advice to everyone in this tumultuous time is learn to forgive people and understand that forgiving someone
and yourself,
which
is way harder.
Forgive yourself and forgive other people, and understand that by forgiving other people, it doesn't mean that you're weak. And that's something I'm building on. When Stabby McStabberson messages me, I could have unloaded both barrels and threw this person under the bus and tried to make their life a living hell. But instead, I realized
you had your cop car moment.
Yep. I realized I trust them. I forgive them. I forgive this person for what they did. Does it make their betrayal less profound? Mm-hmm. No, they still very much betrayed me. But I understand that they had their reasons, whether justified or not. And I forgive them and I move on with my life. Couldn't hear what you said. Siri. So
get with the program, Siri.
Apparently my watch decided to jump in there. But I forgive them for what they did. Mm-hmm. And I move on. And that doesn't make me weak. And if you think that makes me weak, maybe you need to evaluate your own path in life.
Maybe you're not trusting enough.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the only thing I have to promote is just, Saber School on Instagram, which is at PA Saber School.
Yep.
Please give us a follow, give us a like.
Yeah, it was some really cool shit in the works. We had a lunch meeting after practice today.
We're trying to post more regularly.
Yep. Yeah. Once we finish with the con, we've got some good cinematic projects we're gonna start doing. So as far as upcoming episodes, everybody, I've got I'd have to check my calendar. I think next week I'm doing I believe it's next week. I'm doing a PTSD episode with my friend who's a veteran.
Ooh, I can't wait for
that should be that. Yeah, it's gonna be with TJ. That should be a really fun episode.
Sweet.
I've got a friend of mine, JD. She's gonna do this cryptoid episode with me where we're gonna talk. She's an artist friend of ours. She's also now Padawan in Saber School. We're gonna do an episode about creature mythology. It's going to be real different, real different,
I like
but I think
that.
it's going to be a lot of fun.
And I know it's still in the workshop, but I can't wait for your episodes with Beth and Lance.
Yep.
Or well, not together, but
Yeah.
episode with Lance, episode with Beth. I can't wait for
Yeah,
this as
I've
well.
got an episode, and I don't think it's scheduled yet, but I have an episode coming up here in the future with Bethany, who's been on. She was in the depression episode with JJ, also with one of the Inactioneer episodes.
Yep.
We're going to do an episode focused on Uncle Iroh from Avatar: The Last Airbender.
I love that.
Oh, I know, I love that show. My best friend Lance, who I've mentioned multiple times, he and I are going to be doing an episode. I still don't know the topic, but the fandom is the X-Men. We're going to focus on the X-Men.
Big time X-Men kid
Yeah.
growing up here. So
As far as individual episodes coming up, I'm going to do an episode on the Jedi Order and the I forget what it's called, the rule of impermanence. So we're going to talk a lot about how yeah, it's I made a post on this. Anyone who follows the Facebook, I made a post about a quote that Yoda says, learn to let go everything you fear to lose.
I love that.
So I'm going to do a whole solo episode based on that. I just got a lot of stuff in the works, as always. If you haven't jumped over to the Instagram or the Facebook or the YouTube page for the Gray Path, please give me a like. If
you want to email him at
seek
the gray path at gmail.com.
So just a lot of stuff. I appreciate you all taking your time. I hope you're enjoying these episodes where I bring guests on. Begin doing a lot of them. It's nice to have someone to play off of.
Why'd you bring on that guy that talks all funny like?
The Pennsylvania Cajun himself.
Exactly.
So as always, I'm your host, Tony B, and you all be safe out there.
Peace.